32-year-old Michael Torres was ridiculed by local historians for claiming he'd found ancient stone carvings on his inherited Montana ranch that they dismissed as nothing more than natural rock formations created by an unemployed mechanic with too much imagination. But he had no idea that his uncle's mysterious journal entries about the old symbols would lead to a UNESCO archaeological team confirming his discovery as a 15,000-year-old burial complex that predates known North American civilization by 2,000 years, transforming a broke auto mechanic facing foreclosure into the co-director of the most significant archaeological discovery in modern American history, with National Geographic now funding a $4.2 million excavation project at his previously worthless Montana ranch. Before we dive into this absolutely incredible story, let us know what state you're watching from in the comments. And if this story gives you chills about what might be hidden beneath your own property, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another mind-blowing story about a woman who found prehistoric cave paintings in her basement that museums are now fighting to acquire for $12 million on that. 32 years old, Michael Torres was staring at foreclosure notices scattered across the kitchen table of the dilapidated ranch house he'd inherited from his uncle Ramon, surrounded by bank letters demanding $47,000 in overdue mortgage payments, property tax bills totaling $18,000, and the crushing realization that the 640-acre cattle ranch in the remote Beartooth Mountains of Montana was worth less than the debt attached to it, as he sat in the sweltering August heat of 2024 with no job prospects, no savings, and no way to prevent the bank from seizing the only inheritance his family had ever received from a man whose eccentricities had made him a local legend, but whose death had left Michael with nothing but worthless land and impossible financial obligations. The unemployment benefits that had sustained Michael for 6 months after losing his job as an automotive mechanic in Billings had been exhausted, leaving him completely dependent on the ranch property that real estate agents had valued at $280,000, far below the $325,000 in combined mortgage and tax debt that made selling the property a financial impossibility. The remote location, 47 miles from the nearest town of Red Lodge, meant that the property had no potential buyers interested in isolated ranch land that required substantial investment to become profitable for cattle operations or agricultural development. Michael's background as an automotive mechanic had provided him with practical skills in equipment repair and maintenance, but had never prepared him for managing agricultural operations or understanding the complex financial requirements of ranch management that his uncle Ramon had handled throughout his 40-year ownership of the property. The mechanical expertise that had sustained Michael's career in urban environments was largely irrelevant for addressing the economic and operational challenges of rural ranch management in one of Montana's most isolated agricultural regions. The ranch that Uncle Ramon had operated as a small-scale cattle operation was now completely unprofitable due to declining beef prices, increasing feed costs, and infrastructure deterioration that would require over $85,000 in immediate investment to restore basic operational capability. The fencing, water systems, and cattle handling facilities had been neglected during Ramon's final years due to his declining health and reduced income, creating property conditions that made resuming agricultural operations economically impossible. Without substantial capital investment that Michael couldn't access, Uncle Ramon's reputation in Red Lodge and surrounding communities had been that of an eccentric rancher who spent more time exploring his property with metal detectors and digging tools than managing cattle operations, creating local folklore about his obsession with Indian artifacts and his claims about discovering evidence of ancient civilizations on ranch property that neighbors had always assumed was typical Montana grazing land with no unusual historical significance. The isolation that characterized the Torres Ranch property had been both Ramon's preference and the source of local speculation about his unusual activities and the amount of time he spent exploring remote areas of the ranch that were inaccessible to neighbors and visitors. The property's location in the Beartooth Mountains provided natural privacy and protection from casual observation, while also making it difficult for Michael to attract potential buyers or partners who might be interested in developing alternative uses for land that was unsuitable for conventional agricultural or residential development. Michael's desperate financial situation had been complicated by his complete lack of knowledge about ranch operations, agricultural financing, or the legal procedures required for managing inherited property in rural Montana. The complexity of ranch ownership, combined with his urban background and mechanical skills, had made it impossible for him to develop realistic plans for generating income from property that required specialized knowledge and substantial capital investment to become profitable under contemporary agricultural conditions. The ranch house that Michael had inherited with the property reflected Ramon's declining circumstances during his final years, with a failing heating system that would cost $12,000 to replace, a roof that leaked in multiple locations during Montana's harsh winter weather, and electrical wiring that hadn't been updated since the 1970s and posed serious safety hazards that insurance companies had identified as grounds for policy cancellation. The infrastructure problems throughout the property represented additional financial obligations that Michael couldn't address while facing foreclosure and unemployment. The cattle that Ramon had maintained throughout most of his ranching career had been sold during his final 2 years due to his inability to manage livestock operations while dealing with health problems and financial difficulties that had made feeding and caring for animals economically impossible. The absence of cattle meant that the ranch generated no revenue while continuing to accumulate property taxes, maintenance costs, and mortgage payments that created an impossible financial situation for anyone attempting to maintain ownership without substantial outside income. Michael's personal financial situation had deteriorated rapidly after losing his mechanic position at Brennan's Auto Repair in Billings, where he had worked for 8 years before the shop closed due to competition from National Chain Repair, services that had eliminated most independent automotive businesses throughout south-central Montana. His unemployment had occurred during the worst possible timing, just 3 months after Ramon's death, when Michael was attempting to understand his inheritance while dealing with grief and the complex legal procedures required for property transfer. The job market for automotive mechanics in Montana had been severely impacted by consolidation in the automotive repair industry, with most available positions requiring relocation to larger cities or accepting wages that were insufficient for supporting basic living expenses while maintaining ranch property in a remote mountain location. Michael's specialized skills in diesel engine repair had made him valuable in urban environments, but rural Montana offered limited opportunities for mechanics who lacked agricultural equipment experience. The credit card debt that Michael had, accumulated while unemployed, had reached $23,000, representing cash advances and living expenses that he had been unable to cover through unemployment benefits that provided only $100 to $200 monthly, compared to his previous mechanic salary of $3,800 monthly. The credit card interest rates exceeding 18% annually meant that minimum payments consumed most of his remaining unemployment benefits, while principal balances continued increasing despite his efforts to reduce spending and eliminate unnecessary expenses. The social isolation that had affected Michael since moving to the ranch property had been compounded by his lack of connection to rural Montana communities and his limited understanding of agricultural social networks that might have provided practical assistance or employment opportunities for someone willing to learn ranch management. The nearest neighbors were 6 miles away, and Michael's daily contact with other people had been minimal since Ramon's death, creating emotional isolation that made his financial stress more difficult to manage. The vehicle that Michael depended on for transportation was a 2007 Ford F-150 pickup truck with 180,000 miles that required immediate repairs totaling $3,400 to remain roadworthy, including transmission work, brake replacement, and suspension repairs that Michael couldn't afford. While facing foreclosure, the truck represented his only means of accessing employment opportunities in Red Lodge or Billings, making the repair costs essential but impossible to finance through conventional means. The legal complexities that surrounded inherited property in Montana had created additional stress and expenses for Michael, who had been forced to hire an attorney for estate settlement procedures that had cost $4,800 in legal fees while requiring extensive documentation and court appearances that had interfered with his job search efforts. The probate process had taken 7 months to complete, during which time property taxes and mortgage payments had continued accumulating while Michael couldn't legally sell or mortgage the property. The property taxes that Stillwater County assessed on ranch land had increased substantially during Ramon's final years of ownership, rising from $8,200 annually in 2019 to $14,600 in 2024 due to reassessment procedures that had classified portions of the ranch as potential development property rather than agricultural land. The tax increase had been based on speculation about future recreational development in the Beartooth Mountains region, creating tax burdens that small ranchers couldn't afford despite the remote location and poor road access that made development economically unfeasible. The mortgage that Ramon had obtained in 2015 to finance ranch improvements and equipment purchases had been structured with variable interest rates that had increased from 4.2% to 7.8% during the period when inflation and federal monetary policy had made borrowing costs prohibitive for agricultural operations. The monthly mortgage payment had increased from $1,400 to $2,200, creating debt service requirements that exceeded the ranch's income-generating capacity even under optimal cattle market conditions. The equipment that remained on the ranch property included a 1995 John Deere tractor, a hay baler, and various implements that were worth approximately $35,000 in total, but required immediate repairs and maintenance that would cost more than their collective value. The machinery had been essential for Ramon's cattle operations, but was unsuitable for generating income without substantial investment in mechanical restoration and safety updates that Michael couldn't finance. The foreclosure proceedings that were scheduled to begin in exactly 38 days represented not only the loss of his inheritance, but also the end of Michael's connection to the only family property that had survived 4 generations of Torres family ownership in Montana. The emotional significance of losing Ramon's ranch exceeded the financial implications, as the property represented Michael's last link to family history and the rural Montana heritage that his urban lifestyle had never allowed him to fully understand or appreciate. The local historians and amateur archaeologists who had occasionally visited Ramon's ranch during his lifetime had consistently dismissed his claims about discovering ancient artifacts and stone formations that might indicate prehistoric human activity in the Beartooth Mountains region. Dr. Patricia Williams from the Montana Historical Society had visited the ranch in 2019 and had concluded that Ramon's discoveries were natural geological formations that had been misinterpreted by someone without formal training in archaeology or historical research methods. Dr. Williams's assessment had been particularly dismissive of Ramon's claims about finding carved stone markers and burial sites throughout the ranch property, characterizing his interpretations as wishful thinking by an isolated rancher who had read too many treasure hunting magazines and watched too many archaeological documentaries without understanding the scientific methodology required for legitimate archaeological investigation. Her written report had described Ramon's alleged discoveries as natural rock outcroppings and erosion patterns that have been romanticized into imaginary historical significance. The dismissive attitude that local experts had maintained toward Ramon's archaeological interests had been based on established academic consensus that the Beartooth Mountains region had been unsuitable for sustained prehistoric human habitation due to elevation, climate, and limited natural resources that would have made permanent settlement economically and logistically impossible for ancient populations. The conventional understanding of regional prehistory indicated that human activity in the area had been limited to seasonal hunting and temporary camping by nomadic groups who had left minimal archaeological evidence. Professor David Richardson from Montana State University's Anthropology Department had published research in 2018 that specifically addressed amateur archaeological claims in the Beartooth region, concluding that elevation above 6,000 feet and harsh winter conditions would have prevented year-round habitation by prehistoric peoples who lacked advanced shelter construction and food preservation techniques. Richardson's paper had been cited by other academics as definitive evidence that significant archaeological discoveries were impossible in high-altitude Montana locations. The academic establishment's rejection of Ramon's archaeological theories had been reinforced by the Montana Archaeological Society's official position that legitimate prehistoric sites in the region had already been identified and documented through professional surveys conducted during the 1970s and 1980s. The Society's published guidelines stated that new archaeological discoveries in Montana required professional excavation and peer review before being considered credible, dismissing amateur investigations as scientifically worthless regardless of what artifacts might be discovered. The ridicule that Ramon had faced from local residents and academic authorities had intensified during his final years, when his determination to prove his archaeological theories had led him to invite multiple experts to examine his discoveries, only to face repeated dismissal and increasing social isolation, as his claims were systematically rejected by everyone with professional credentials in archaeology, anthropology, or Montana history. The local newspaper, the Red Lodge Carbon County News, had published an article in 2020 titled "Local Ranchers' Archaeological Dreams" that had portrayed Ramon as a harmless eccentric whose treasure hunting hobby provided entertainment for local residents while having no scientific value. The article had quoted Dr. Williams extensively and had included photographs of Ramon's stone formations with captions describing them as interesting natural geology that had been creatively interpreted by someone without scientific training. The financial pressure that Michael faced while dealing with foreclosure had been intensified by his realization that Ramon's archaeological obsession had consumed resources that might have been used for ranch maintenance and debt reduction during his final years. Michael had discovered receipts indicating that Ramon had spent over $15,000 on metal detectors, excavation tools, and archaeological reference books during the 5 years before his death, money that could have been used for equipment repairs or mortgage payments. The storage buildings on the ranch property contained Ramon's extensive collection of archaeological equipment, research materials, and carefully catalogued artifacts that local experts had dismissed as worthless. Michael had initially viewed the collection as additional clutter that would need to be disposed of before selling the property, but his desperate financial situation was forcing him to examine every possible asset that might have value for resolving his crisis. But what local historians, academic experts, and Michael himself didn't know, and what Ramon had never been able to prove to the satisfaction of credentialed authorities, was that his decades of amateur archaeological investigation had actually identified evidence of one of the most significant prehistoric sites in North American history, a discovery that would revolutionize understanding of early human civilization while transforming Michael's impossible financial situation into opportunities that exceeded anything he could have imagined about the true value of his uncle's seemingly worthless Montana ranch. Michael Torres had never expected to inherit anything from his uncle Ramon, and certainly never imagined that a Montana cattle ranch would become his only chance at financial survival during the most desperate period of his adult life. At 32 years old, Michael's background as a skilled automotive mechanic had always provided him with stable employment and modest financial security, but had never prepared him for the complex challenges of rural property ownership or the devastating economic realities that would force him to examine every possible asset that might prevent complete financial ruin. Michael's childhood in Billings, Montana, had been shaped by his parents' emphasis on practical education and technical skills that could provide reliable employment in a state where economic opportunities were often limited to agriculture, mining, and service industries that offered modest wages but steady work for people willing to develop specialized expertise. His father, Carlos Torres, had worked as a heavy equipment operator for the Montana Department of Transportation, while his mother, Elena, had managed bookkeeping for small businesses throughout Billings, creating a household that valued hard work, financial responsibility, and the technical knowledge that could provide economic stability in rural American communities. The decision to pursue automotive mechanics training immediately after high school graduation had been motivated by Michael's natural aptitude for understanding mechanical systems and his recognition that automotive repair would provide consistent employment opportunities throughout Montana's small towns and cities, where independent mechanics were essential for maintaining the vehicles that rural residents depended on for transportation across vast distances. His enrollment in the automotive technology program at Montana State University Billings had represented a practical educational choice that could lead to immediate employment and gradual career advancement through specialization and experience. Michael's academic performance during his 2-year automotive technology program had been exceptional, earning a 3.8 GPA while mastering advanced diagnostic techniques, computer-controlled engine systems, and specialized repair procedures that made him valuable to employers who needed mechanics capable of working on contemporary vehicles with complex electronic components. His instructors had consistently praised his problem-solving abilities and his meticulous attention to detail, qualities that had made him particularly effective at diagnosing difficult mechanical problems that challenged less experienced technicians. The apprenticeship that Michael had completed at Brennan's Auto Repair during his final semester had led to immediate full-time employment upon graduation, providing him with the opportunity to develop advanced skills in diesel engine repair, transmission rebuilding, and electrical system diagnostics under the supervision of experienced mechanics who had worked in the automotive industry for decades. The practical experience that he had gained through daily exposure to complex repair challenges had supplemented his formal education while establishing his reputation as a reliable and competent technician. Michael's 8-year career at Brennan's auto repair had been characterized by steady advancement from entry-level technician to senior mechanic, responsible for the shop's most challenging diagnostic work and customer relationships with commercial fleet operators who depended on Brennan's expertise for maintaining delivery trucks, construction equipment, and agricultural machinery. His specialization in diesel engine repair had made him particularly valuable for serving rural customers whose vehicles and equipment required specialized knowledge that many urban mechanics lacked. The technical expertise that Michael had developed during his automotive career included advanced skills in computer diagnostics, hybrid vehicle systems, and specialized commercial vehicle repair that had made him one of the most capable mechanics in south-central Montana. His ability to diagnose and repair complex problems efficiently had earned him recognition from customers and colleagues, while providing him with annual earnings that had reached $48,000 by 2023. Representing financial success that exceeded the income of many college graduates working in Montana's limited professional job market. Michael's personal financial management had been exemplary throughout his automotive career, with consistent savings, responsible credit use, and careful budgeting that had allowed him to accumulate $15,000 in emergency savings while maintaining a debt-to-income ratio that qualified him for favorable credit terms on his vehicle and personal loans. His financial discipline had reflected the values that his parents had instilled about the importance of living within one's means and preparing for economic uncertainty that could affect working-class families without warning. The work ethic that had characterized Michael's approach to his automotive career had extended to his personal life, where he had volunteered as a mentor for high school students interested in pursuing technical careers and had donated his mechanical expertise to help elderly residents and low-income families maintain their vehicles when professional repair costs exceeded their financial capabilities. His community involvement had reflected his understanding that technical skills carried social responsibilities, and that successful people had obligations to help others who faced economic challenges. Michael's relationship with his uncle Ramon had been limited during his childhood and young adult years due to the geographical distance between Billings and the remote ranch property, but had been characterized by mutual respect and the shared Torres family values of independence, hard work, and practical problem-solving that had sustained their family through 4 generations of Montana residents. Ramon's annual visits to Billings during holidays and family gatherings had provided opportunities for conversation about mechanical repair, ranch management, and the challenges of maintaining equipment and infrastructure in remote locations. Practical skills that Michael had learned from Ramon during childhood visits to the ranch had included basic welding, equipment maintenance, and problem-solving techniques that had contributed to his success as an automotive mechanic while providing him with appreciation for the ingenuity and resourcefulness that rural life required. Ramon's ability to repair and modify equipment using available materials and improvise solutions had impressed Michael and had influenced his approach to mechanical challenges throughout his career. Ramon's stories about archaeological discoveries and ancient artifacts had fascinated Michael during his youth, but had seemed like entertaining family folklore rather than serious research that might have academic or commercial value. Michael's urban lifestyle and focus on automotive career development had prevented him from fully understanding Ramon's passion for exploration and historical investigation, but had not diminished his respect for his uncle's intelligence and his dedication to pursuits that provided personal satisfaction regardless of external recognition or financial reward. The news of Ramon's sudden death from a stroke in March 2024 had been devastating for Michael, not only because of the loss of his last surviving relative, but also because Ramon's death had occurred during a period when Michael was facing unemployment and needed family support and guidance for managing the economic crisis that had eliminated his financial security. The timing of Ramon's death had prevented Michael from discussing his employment situation or seeking advice about career alternatives that might be available to someone with his technical background and work experience. The inheritance of Ramon's ranch property had initially seemed like a burden rather than an asset, particularly given Michael's complete lack of experience with agricultural operations and his awareness that rural property ownership required substantial ongoing expenses for maintenance, taxes, and insurance that would consume resources he couldn't afford while unemployed. The legal requirements for estate settlement and property transfer had created additional complications during the period when Michael needed to focus his energy and limited resources on finding new employment. Michael's initial assessment of the ranch property had been conducted with the intention of determining its potential value for immediate sale, but had revealed infrastructure problems and maintenance requirements that made the property virtually unsaleable without substantial investment in repairs and improvements. The remote location and poor road access had further reduced the property's marketability, creating a situation where Michael had inherited an asset that generated expenses without providing income or liquidation opportunities. The financial planning that Michael had attempted for managing the inherited property had been complicated by his lack of knowledge about agricultural taxation, rural property management, and the specialized insurance requirements that applied to ranch operations. The complexity of ranch ownership had exceeded his understanding of real estate and business management, while the ongoing expenses had quickly exhausted his savings and forced him to rely on credit cards for basic living expenses. The job search that Michael had conducted throughout the summer of 2024 had been frustrated by the consolidation of automotive repair services throughout Montana, with most independent shops being eliminated by competition from national chains that offered standardized services at reduced prices. The employment opportunities that remained in automotive repair were primarily with large dealerships or chain operations that offered lower wages and less job security than the independent shop environment where Michael had developed his career. The geographic isolation of the ranch property had complicated Michael's job search efforts by limiting his access to potential employers and requiring extensive travel for interviews and employment opportunities in Billings, Bozeman, or other Montana cities where automotive mechanics might find work. The transportation costs and time requirements for job searching had consumed resources that Michael needed for basic survival, while reducing his ability to maintain the ranch property or address urgent repair needs. Michael's attempts to generate income from the ranch property through equipment sales, scrap metal recovery, or temporary agricultural activities had been unsuccessful due to the deteriorated condition of machinery and infrastructure that would have required substantial investment to become productive. The equipment that remained on the property was primarily valuable for parts or scrap metal, but lacked the commercial value necessary for addressing his debt obligations or preventing foreclosure. The social isolation that Michael had experienced since moving to the ranch property had been particularly challenging, given his urban background and his lack of connection to rural Montana communities that might have provided employment opportunities or practical assistance. The nearest neighbors were separated by miles of rough terrain, and Michael's daily contact with other people had been minimal since Ramon's death, creating emotional stress that compounded his financial anxiety. The mechanical skills that had defined Michael's professional identity were largely irrelevant for generating income in a remote agricultural area where equipment repair opportunities were limited and potential customers were scattered across vast distances. The specialization that had made him valuable in urban automotive repair was less useful in rural environments where mechanical problems were often addressed through improvised solutions rather than professional repair services. The educational background that Michael had developed through formal automotive training and 8 years of professional experience represented substantial human capital that was being wasted due to the limited employment opportunities available in rural Montana. His technical knowledge and diagnostic expertise could have provided valuable services to customers throughout the region, but the economic infrastructure for supporting independent automotive repair services was insufficient for sustaining profitable business operations. Michael's determination to preserve his family's connection to the ranch property had been motivated by emotional attachment to Ramon's memory and respect for the Torres family heritage that the property represented, but was being undermined by the mathematical impossibility of maintaining ownership without substantial income or financial assistance. The conflict between family loyalty and financial survival was creating psychological stress that affected his decision-making abilities and his capacity for developing effective strategies for addressing his crisis. The personal integrity that had characterized Michael's approach to business relationships and financial obligations throughout his automotive career was being tested by the desperate circumstances that were forcing him to consider options that conflicted with his values and self-respect. The possibility of abandoning the ranch property and allowing foreclosure to proceed would represent not only financial failure, but also the abandonment of family responsibilities and the Torres heritage that had sustained 4 generations of Montana residents. The practical problem-solving abilities that had made Michael successful as an automotive mechanic were being applied to his exploration of the ranch property and his systematic examination of every possible asset that might provide solutions to his financial crisis. His mechanical training had taught him that complex problems often had solutions that weren't immediately obvious, and that success required methodical analysis and willingness to explore unconventional approaches when conventional solutions proved inadequate. The attention to detail that had been essential for diagnosing complex automotive problems was now being directed toward understanding Ramon's archaeological research and the extensive collection of artifacts and documentation that filled the ranch's storage buildings. Michael's systematic approach to examining Ramon's materials was motivated by desperation rather than academic interest, but was revealing aspects of his uncle's work that suggested greater sophistication and potential value than anyone had previously recognized. The respect for craftsmanship and technical expertise that Michael had developed throughout his automotive career was helping him appreciate the quality and precision of Ramon's archaeological documentation, even though he lacked the specialized knowledge necessary for evaluating the scientific significance of his uncle's discoveries. The meticulous record-keeping and careful organization of Ramon's research materials suggested a level of professionalism that exceeded the amateur status that local experts had assigned to his archaeological activities. The deadline pressure, created by foreclosure proceedings scheduled to begin in 38 days, was forcing Michael to examine every possible option for generating income or discovering assets that might provide solutions to his financial crisis. His systematic search of the ranch property for anything of potential value had been motivated by desperation rather than realistic expectations, but was leading him toward discoveries that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his uncle's activities and the true nature of the property he had inherited. The personal character traits that had made Michael successful as an automotive mechanic persistence, attention to detail, systematic problem-solving, and refusal to accept defeat when facing difficult challenges were now being applied to the desperate search for solutions that might prevent the loss of his family's property while providing opportunities for building a sustainable future. His mechanical training had taught him that complex problems often had solutions that weren't immediately obvious, and that success required methodical analysis and willingness to explore unconventional approaches. The technical skills that Michael had developed for understanding complex mechanical systems were proving surprisingly relevant for interpreting Ramon's archaeological research and understanding the sophisticated methods that his uncle had used for documenting and analyzing his discoveries. The precision measurement, detailed documentation, and systematic analysis that characterized Ramon's work reflected the same attention to detail and methodical approach that had made Michael successful in automotive diagnostics and repair. But Michael had no idea that his systematic exploration of Ramon's property and his careful examination of his uncle's archaeological materials would soon reveal evidence that would attract the attention of international experts and transform his desperate financial situation into opportunities that exceeded anything his practical Montana upbringing had taught him to expect from hard work and determination alone. Ramon Torres had always been considered an eccentric by the residents of Red Lodge and the surrounding Beartooth Mountains region, but the true extent of his unusual background and the sophisticated nature of his archaeological research had remained hidden from everyone who knew him throughout his 43 years of Montana ranch ownership. What appeared to local residents as the harmless obsession of an isolated rancher with too much time and imagination had actually been one of the most methodical and scientifically rigorous amateur archaeological investigations in modern American history, conducted with resources and expertise that far exceeded what anyone had recognized during Ramon's lifetime. The ranch property that Ramon had purchased in 1981 had been selected not for its agricultural potential or investment value, but because geological surveys and topographical analysis had indicated that the Beartooth Mountains location possessed unique characteristics that made it ideal for preserving archaeological evidence from prehistoric periods when climate conditions and human settlement patterns had been dramatically different from contemporary assumptions about early North American civilization. Ramon's decision to establish his ranch in one of Montana's most remote and inaccessible locations had been motivated by scientific considerations rather than agricultural economics or lifestyle preferences. Ramon's educational background, which he had never fully disclosed to family members or local residents, included advanced degrees in geology and anthropology from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, where he had specialized in prehistoric archaeology and geological dating techniques before conducting fieldwork throughout Central America during the 1970s. His academic training had provided him with expertise in archaeological methodology, geological analysis, and artifact preservation that far exceeded the amateur status that Montana residents had assigned to his research activities. The decision to relocate from Mexico to Montana in 1981 had been motivated by Ramon's analysis of geological and climatological data that suggested the Beartooth Mountains region might contain evidence of prehistoric human habitation that predated established timelines for North American settlement. The academic research that Ramon had conducted during his graduate studies had indicated that conventional theories about early human migration and settlement patterns were incomplete, and that significant archaeological discoveries might be possible in high-altitude locations that had been dismissed by mainstream archaeology as unsuitable for prehistoric habitation. The ranch property that Ramon had selected contained geological formations and topographical features that indicated potential for preserving organic materials and artificial structures from prehistoric periods when climate conditions had been more favorable for human settlement at high altitudes. The property's elevation, drainage patterns, and soil composition provided optimal conditions for archaeological preservation, while the remote location offered protection from development and casual disturbance that could destroy evidence before it could be properly documented and analyzed. Ramon's initial archaeological survey of the ranch property had been conducted using professional equipment and scientific methodology that he had acquired during his academic training and fieldwork experience in Central America. The ground-penetrating radar, magnetometer readings, and soil analysis techniques that Ramon had employed during his first year of ownership had immediately revealed subsurface anomalies and geological disturbances that suggested human activity had occurred on the property during periods when conventional archaeology maintained that the region had been uninhabitable. The systematic excavation program that Ramon had undertaken during the 1980s had been designed according to professional archaeological standards, with careful documentation of stratigraphy, precise measurement of artifact locations, and preservation techniques that maintained the scientific value of discoveries while protecting them from environmental damage. The excavation methods that Ramon had used exceeded the standards typically employed by amateur archaeologists and reflected his professional training and understanding of scientific methodology. The artifacts that Ramon had discovered during his initial excavations had included stone tools, ceramic fragments, and organic materials that appeared to be significantly older than any previously documented archaeological evidence from the North American Rocky Mountain region. The preliminary dating techniques that Ramon had applied to his discoveries had suggested ages that contradicted established academic consensus about the timeline and geographical extent of prehistoric human settlement in North America. The laboratory facility that Ramon had constructed in one of the ranch's storage buildings during the late 1980s had been equipped with sophisticated analytical equipment for conducting detailed examination of archaeological materials using techniques that were typically available only to university research programs or major museums. The microscopy equipment, chemical analysis capabilities, and environmental controls that Ramon had installed exceeded what most amateur researchers could access or afford, reflecting his commitment to maintaining professional standards despite his isolation from academic institutions. The documentation system that Ramon had developed for recording his archaeological discoveries had been extraordinarily comprehensive, including detailed photographs, precise measurements, geological context, analysis, and cross-references to similar artifacts from other archaeological sites throughout North and Central America. The database that Ramon had created during 3 decades of research contained over 8,000 individual artifact records with complete provenance information and analytical results that provided scientific validity for his discoveries. The correspondence that Ramon had maintained with international archaeological experts had been extensive but carefully discreet, reflecting his awareness that his discoveries challenged established academic theories and would face skepticism from researchers whose careers had been built on conventional interpretations of North American prehistory. The network of academic contacts that Ramon had developed through his graduate training and fieldwork experience had provided him with access to comparative archaeological data and analytical techniques that enhanced the scientific value of his research. The financial resources that Ramon had devoted to his archaeological research had been substantial, totaling over $200,000 during 3 decades of systematic investigation and equipment acquisition. The funding for Ramon's research had come from careful financial management of his ranch operations and modest cattle business, combined with consulting fees that he had earned through periodic collaboration with Central American archaeological projects that valued his specialized knowledge and analytical expertise. The secrecy that had characterized Ramon's archaeological work had been motivated by his understanding that premature disclosure of his discoveries could result in site destruction by treasure hunters, academic appropriation of his research, or legal complications related to artifact ownership and land use regulations. Ramon's decision to maintain complete confidentiality about his work had protected his research site, while allowing him to complete systematic documentation before seeking external validation from qualified experts. The theoretical framework that had guided Ramon's archaeological research had been based on his hypothesis that climate changes during the late Pleistocene period had created temporary conditions favorable for human settlement in high-altitude locations that later became unsuitable for permanent habitation. Ramon's geological analysis had suggested that the Beartooth Mountains region had experienced warmer and more stable climate conditions between 15,000 and 12,000 years ago, creating opportunities for advanced prehistoric cultures to establish permanent settlements. The comparative archaeological analysis that Ramon had conducted had identified similarities between artifacts discovered on his property and materials from Central American sites that represented some of the most sophisticated prehistoric cultures in the Western Hemisphere. The technological sophistication and artistic quality of artifacts from the Montana site suggested cultural connections or technological diffusion that challenged conventional understanding of prehistoric communication and migration patterns. Between North and Central America, the geological dating evidence that Ramon had accumulated through professional consultation with specialized laboratories had consistently indicated that his archaeological discoveries were significantly older than any previously documented human activity in the Rocky Mountain region. The radiocarbon dating, geological stratification analysis, and soil chemistry studies that Ramon had commissioned had provided scientific validation for age estimates that placed his discoveries among the oldest evidence of human activity in North America. The academic significance that Ramon had recognized in his archaeological discoveries had been confirmed through careful comparison with published research from major archaeological sites throughout the Americas. The artifacts and structural remains that Ramon had documented represented technological capabilities and cultural sophistication that exceeded what academic consensus had attributed to prehistoric populations in the North American interior during the periods when his site had been occupied. The preservation conditions that characterized Ramon's archaeological site had been extraordinary, with organic materials, wooden implements, and textile fragments surviving in condition that was virtually unprecedented for prehistoric sites in temperate climates. The combination of altitude, soil chemistry, and drainage patterns had created natural preservation conditions that maintained archaeological materials with clarity and completeness that provided unprecedented insights into prehistoric daily life and technological capabilities. The structural remains that Ramon had identified through systematic excavation had included foundation stones, hearth areas, and organized living spaces that indicated permanent settlement rather than temporary camping or seasonal hunting activities. The architectural evidence that Ramon had documented suggested a level of community organization and construction capability that contradicted academic assumptions about the technological limitations of prehistoric populations in the North American interior. The agricultural evidence that Ramon had discovered had included sophisticated irrigation systems, crop storage facilities, and agricultural tools that indicated advanced farming techniques and food production capabilities. The agricultural technology that had been preserved at Ramon's site suggested that prehistoric populations in the region had developed sustainable farming systems that supported permanent settlement at high altitudes under climate conditions that had subsequently changed. The astronomical alignments that Ramon had identified in the structural remains suggested sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles and their relationship to agricultural planning and ceremonial activities. The precision of astronomical orientations that had been incorporated into building layouts indicated mathematical knowledge and engineering capabilities that exceeded conventional estimates of prehistoric technological development in North America. Artistic artifacts that Ramon had discovered had included carved stone figures, decorated ceramic vessels, and metalwork that demonstrated exceptional artistic skill and cultural sophistication. The quality and complexity of artistic production that had been preserved at the site indicated a level of cultural development that challenged academic assumptions about the technological and artistic capabilities of prehistoric populations in the North American interior. The trade network evidence that Ramon had identified through artifact analysis had included materials and technological influences from regions throughout North and Central America, suggesting extensive commercial and cultural connections that contradicted conventional understanding of prehistoric isolation and limited communication between distant populations. The variety of non-local materials and technological influences represented at the site indicated participation in continent-wide trade and cultural exchange systems. The population estimates that Ramon had developed through systematic analysis of living spaces, refuse deposits, and infrastructure capacity had suggested that his archaeological site had supported a permanent population of several hundred individuals over multiple generations. The scale of settlement that had been documented challenged academic assumptions about population density and community organization capabilities among prehistoric populations in the North American interior. The technological innovations that were represented in Ramon's archaeological discoveries had included metallurgy, advanced ceramics, sophisticated tool production, and engineering techniques that appeared to be several thousand years ahead of the technological development timeline that academic consensus had established for prehistoric North American populations. The technological sophistication that had been preserved at the site represented one of the most advanced prehistoric cultural complexes documented in North America. The environmental management evidence that Ramon had documented had included sophisticated water management systems, soil improvement techniques, and sustainable resource exploitation practices that indicated advanced understanding of ecological principles and long-term environmental planning. The environmental technologies that had been preserved at the site suggested a level of ecological sophistication that exceeded conventional understanding of prehistoric environmental knowledge and management capabilities. But the most extraordinary aspect of Ramon's archaeological discoveries was the evidence that this advanced prehistoric culture had maintained detailed records of their activities, technological knowledge, and historical development through a sophisticated system of carved stone records and symbolic communication that represented one of the earliest writing systems documented in North America. The historical records that Ramon had discovered and partially decoded suggested that the prehistoric culture at his site had maintained accurate calendars, historical chronicles, and technological documentation that provided unprecedented insights into prehistoric intellectual and organizational capabilities. The implications of Ramon's archaeological discoveries extended far beyond academic curiosity about prehistoric life, as the technological and organizational innovations that had been preserved at his site contained practical applications for contemporary problems in sustainable agriculture, environmental management, and community organization that could benefit modern society. The advanced techniques that prehistoric populations had developed for managing high-altitude agriculture and environmental challenges offered solutions to contemporary problems that modern technology had been unable to address effectively. The legal and ethical complexities that surrounded Ramon's archaeological discoveries had been substantial, involving questions about artifact ownership, land use regulations, indigenous cultural rights, and academic access to research materials that required careful consideration of multiple stakeholder interests and legal obligations. Ramon's awareness of these complexities had contributed to his decision to maintain secrecy about his work until comprehensive documentation could be completed and appropriate institutional arrangements could be established. But Ramon's sudden death in March 2024 had eliminated the opportunity for him to complete the institutional arrangements and academic collaborations that would have been necessary for properly sharing his discoveries with the scientific community while protecting the site from damage or inappropriate exploitation. The timing of Ramon's death had created an urgent situation that required immediate attention to preserve both the archaeological site and the scientific value of discoveries that represented one of the most significant archaeological finds in North American history. Michael Torres had inherited not only a financially troubled ranch property, but also one of the most important archaeological sites in the Western Hemisphere, along with 30 years of scientific documentation that would revolutionize understanding of prehistoric North American civilization while providing solutions to his desperate financial crisis that exceeded anything he could have imagined about the true value of his uncle's seemingly eccentric archaeological obsession. It was 6:30 a.m. on September 12, 2024. When Michael Torres first discovered the hidden entrance to Ramon's main excavation site, concealed beneath what appeared to be a natural rock formation on the eastern slope of the ranch property, exactly 27 days before foreclosure proceedings were scheduled to begin and destroy his family's connection to what would soon be recognized as the most significant archaeological discovery in North American history. The entrance had been so expertly camouflaged that Michael had walked past it dozens of times during his desperate search for anything of value, until a combination of morning sunlight and his systematic examination of Ramon's detailed site maps finally revealed the sophisticated engineering that had protected 30 years of revolutionary archaeological work. The discovery occurred as Michael was conducting his most thorough examination yet of Ramon's research materials, driven by the approaching foreclosure deadline and his complete exhaustion of conventional options for generating income or finding employment that could address his $65,000 debt crisis. The hand-drawn maps that filled Ramon's journals had initially seemed like the fantasy sketches of an eccentric amateur. But Michael's methodical comparison of the drawings with actual topographical features was revealing that his uncle's documentation possessed a precision and accuracy that reflected professional surveying capabilities and intimate knowledge of the ranch property's hidden geological features. Michael's breakthrough in understanding Ramon's mapping system came when he realized that his uncle had been using a sophisticated coordinate system that incorporated astronomical alignments and geological markers to create navigation references that would remain accurate despite seasonal changes in vegetation and weather-related alterations to surface features. The mapping technique that Ramon had employed was far more advanced than typical amateur exploration methods and indicated specialized training in archaeological site documentation and preservation. The camouflaged entrance that Michael discovered was protected by a carefully constructed stone barrier that appeared to be natural rock formation, but had actually been engineered to provide security while maintaining environmental integration that prevented detection by casual observers or aerial surveillance. The construction quality and engineering sophistication of Ramon's concealment system indicated professional knowledge of archaeological site protection and understanding of the security requirements necessary for preserving valuable discoveries from unauthorized access. As Michael carefully removed the stones that concealed the entrance, following the detailed procedures that Ramon had documented in his journals, he was immediately struck by the scale and sophistication of the excavation that his uncle had conducted beneath the ranch property. The underground complex that Ramon had revealed through decades of systematic archaeological work extended far beyond anything that Michael had imagined possible for amateur investigation, with carefully supported tunnels, environmental controls, and organized work areas that reflected professional archaeological methodology and substantial financial investment. The main excavation chamber that Michael entered contained the most extraordinary collection of prehistoric artifacts that had ever been discovered in North America, with thousands of perfectly preserved implements, artistic objects, and technological devices arranged in organized displays that demonstrated the advanced cultural capabilities of the civilization that had occupied the site over 15,000 years ago. The preservation conditions within the chamber were remarkable, with organic materials, textiles, and wooden implements surviving in condition that provided unprecedented insights into prehistoric daily life and technological sophistication. The stone carvings that covered the chamber walls contained detailed historical records, astronomical calculations, and technological documentation that represented one of the earliest and most sophisticated writing systems ever discovered in the Western Hemisphere. The precision and complexity of the carved records indicated mathematical knowledge, astronomical understanding, and historical consciousness that far exceeded conventional estimates of prehistoric intellectual capabilities in North America. Michael's initial exploration of the excavation site was overwhelming both intellectually and emotionally, as he realized that Ramon's archaeological work had revealed evidence of a prehistoric civilization whose technological and cultural achievements challenged fundamental assumptions about early human development in North America. The quality and sophistication of artifacts preserved at the site exceeded anything that Michael had seen in museums or archaeological documentaries, representing a level of cultural advancement that contradicted established academic theories about prehistoric capabilities. The systematic documentation that Ramon had maintained throughout his archaeological work included detailed photographs, precise measurements, and analytical reports that provided scientific validation for discoveries that would revolutionize understanding of prehistoric North American civilization. The comprehensive nature of Ramon's research records indicated years of professional quality work that had been conducted according to rigorous scientific standards, despite the isolation and secrecy that had characterized his investigation. The technological artifacts that Michael discovered in Ramon's excavation included sophisticated metallurgy, advanced ceramics, precision tools, and engineering devices that appeared to be thousands of years ahead of the technological development timeline that academic consensus had established for prehistoric North American populations. The technological sophistication represented at the site indicated capabilities that challenged conventional understanding of prehistoric innovation and technological diffusion. But Michael's most significant discovery was Ramon's analysis indicating that the prehistoric culture documented at the site had developed sustainable technologies and environmental management techniques that could provide solutions to contemporary problems in agriculture, energy production, and environmental conservation. The practical applications of prehistoric innovations that Ramon had documented offered potential commercial value that exceeded pure academic interest and could attract attention from industries and government agencies seeking solutions to modern technological challenges. The legal documentation that Michael found among Ramon's research materials included correspondence with international archaeological experts, preliminary agreements with academic institutions, and detailed plans for transitioning the site from private research to professional archaeological investigation under arrangements that would preserve both scientific integrity and legal compliance. Ramon's preparation for eventual disclosure of his discoveries had included careful consideration of legal, ethical, and practical requirements for managing one of the most significant archaeological sites in American history. The financial analysis that Ramon had conducted indicated that the archaeological site could generate substantial revenue through licensing agreements with academic institutions, museum partnerships, documentary rights, and technology transfer arrangements that would provide commercial applications for prehistoric innovations. Ramon's economic projections suggested that proper management of the site's scientific and commercial potential could generate millions of dollars in revenue while advancing archaeological knowledge and providing practical benefits to contemporary society. Michael's decision to contact Dr. Sarah Chen, an archaeological expert at the University of Montana, whose name appeared frequently in Ramon's correspondence, was motivated by his desperate need for professional validation of his discoveries and guidance for managing legal and scientific complexities that exceeded his understanding. Dr. Chen's initial skepticism about Michael's claims was overcome when he provided photographs and detailed descriptions of artifacts that she immediately recognized as potentially revolutionary archaeological evidence. Dr. Chen's emergency visit to the Torres Ranch on September 18, 2024, was conducted with a small team of archaeological specialists whose preliminary examination of Ramon's site confirmed that the discoveries represented one of the most significant archaeological finds in North American history. The professional validation that Dr. Chen provided transformed Michael's desperate situation by confirming that his inherited property contained assets of extraordinary scientific and commercial value. Mr. Torres, Dr. Chen said during her initial assessment of the site, your uncle's archaeological work represents one of the most important discoveries in the history of North American archaeology. The artifacts and site documentation that he has preserved could revolutionize our understanding of prehistoric civilization while providing your family with resources that would address any financial concerns you might have about maintaining ownership of this extraordinary property. The emergency protocols that Dr. Chen implemented for protecting the archaeological site included immediate notification of the National Science Foundation, the Smithsonian Institution, and UNESCO's World Heritage Committee, whose experts confirmed that Ramon's discoveries warranted immediate protection and professional investigation as a site of global archaeological significance. The rapid mobilization of international archaeological resources reflected the extraordinary nature of discoveries that exceeded anything previously documented in North America. The preliminary valuation that international experts conducted indicated that the Torres Ranch contained archaeological assets worth an estimated $50 million in academic licensing fees, museum partnerships, and research collaboration agreements, with additional potential for generating ongoing revenue through educational programs, documentary projects, and technology transfer arrangements. The financial projections that experts developed exceeded Michael's most optimistic hopes for resolving his debt crisis while providing long-term economic security for his family. The legal framework that archaeological experts established for managing the site included immediate debt relief for Michael through emergency research grants, followed by comprehensive partnership agreements with major universities and museums that would provide substantial annual income while preserving his family's ownership of the property. The legal arrangements that were developed protected both Michael's financial interests and the scientific integrity of the archaeological site. The media attention that followed the announcement of Ramon's archaeological discoveries created international recognition for Michael as the guardian of one of the most important prehistoric sites in the world. The interviews that Michael conducted with National Geographic, the Discovery Channel, and major news organizations transformed him from an unemployed mechanic facing foreclosure into a respected figure in the archaeological community whose cooperation was essential for advancing scientific understanding of prehistoric North American civilization. The academic partnerships that were established with the Torres Ranch included collaboration agreements with Harvard University, Stanford University, the University of Pennsylvania, and major international institutions, whose research programs would provide ongoing financial support while advancing scientific investigation of the site. The partnership arrangements guaranteed Michael substantial annual income, while ensuring that Ramon's archaeological legacy would receive the professional attention and scientific validation that his discoveries deserved. The technology transfer. Agreements that were negotiated for commercializing prehistoric innovations discovered at the site included partnerships with agricultural companies, environmental technology firms, and government agencies whose interest in sustainable technologies provided additional revenue streams while contributing to practical applications that could benefit contemporary society. The commercial potential of prehistoric innovations exceeded pure academic value and created opportunities for generating substantial income through licensing arrangements. The National Science Foundation's emergency grant program provided immediate funding of $2.8 million for site preservation and initial research activities, followed by ongoing research support that guaranteed the Torres Ranch sustainable income while protecting the archaeological site from environmental damage and unauthorized access. The federal funding programs that were established reflected recognition that Ramon's discoveries represented national treasures that warranted government support and protection. The UNESCO World Heritage Site designation that was fast-tracked for the Torres Ranch provided international recognition and protection while establishing tourism and educational programs that would generate ongoing revenue for Michael and his family. The World Heritage designation reflected global recognition of the site's extraordinary significance while providing mechanisms for sustainable economic development that could benefit the local community. The museum partnerships that were established included arrangements with the Smithsonian Institution, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and major international museums whose exhibition programs would showcase discoveries from the Torres Ranch while providing substantial licensing fees and ongoing royalty payments. The museum agreements guaranteed Michael long-term income while ensuring that Ramon's discoveries would receive global recognition and educational impact. The documentary and media rights that were negotiated provided additional revenue streams. Through partnerships with National Geographic, the History Channel, and major film studios whose productions would dramatize the story of Ramon's discoveries while generating substantial income for Michael and his family. The media agreements reflected recognition that the Torres Ranch story represented compelling content for educational and entertainment programs with global audience appeal. The educational programs that were developed at the Torres Ranch included Partnerships with universities and educational organizations whose field research and training programs would provide ongoing income while advancing archaeological education and scientific training. The educational partnerships created sustainable revenue sources while ensuring that the site would contribute to archaeological training and public education about prehistoric North American civilization. The research institute that was established at the Torres Ranch created a permanent center for archaeological investigation and technological research that would provide ongoing employment for Michael and long-term economic development for the local community. The institute represented recognition that Ramon's discoveries warranted permanent research infrastructure and ongoing scientific investigation that would continue advancing knowledge for decades to come. The book and publication rights that Michael negotiated provided additional income through partnerships with major publishers whose books and academic publications would document Ramon's discoveries while generating royalty payments and ongoing recognition for the Torres family's contribution to archaeological knowledge. The publication agreements ensured that Ramon's research legacy would be permanently preserved and globally accessible. The speaking and consulting opportunities that emerged from Michael's recognition as guardian of the Torres Ranch provided additional income through presentations at universities, conferences, and professional organizations whose interest in the discoveries created demand for Michael's participation in educational and professional programs. The speaking opportunities reflected recognition of Michael's expertise and his essential role in managing one of the world's most important archaeological sites. The transformation of Michael's life from unemployed mechanic facing foreclosure to internationally recognized guardian of a World Heritage Site exceeded anything he could have imagined about the potential value of his uncle's seemingly eccentric archaeological obsession. The financial security, professional recognition, and scientific contribution that resulted from Ramon's discoveries provided not only solutions to Michael's immediate crisis, but also opportunities for contributing to advancing human knowledge about prehistoric civilization. The vindication of Ramon's archaeological theories through professional validation and international recognition represented justice for a man whose discoveries had been dismissed and ridiculed throughout his lifetime. The academic acknowledgement of Ramon's scientific contributions and the global recognition of his research methodology provided posthumous validation for work that represented one of the most successful amateur archaeological investigations in history. The broader implications of discoveries at the Torres Ranch extended beyond archaeological knowledge to practical applications for contemporary problems in sustainable agriculture, environmental management, and community organization that could benefit modern society. The technological and organizational innovations that prehistoric populations had developed at the site offered solutions to contemporary challenges that modern technology had been unable to address effectively. The international collaboration that emerged from Ramon's discoveries created research partnerships between American institutions and universities throughout the world, whose joint investigation of the site advanced global understanding of prehistoric civilization while providing ongoing economic benefits for Michael and the local community. The international attention reflected recognition that the Torres Ranch contained discoveries of global significance that warranted cooperative investigation and shared scientific resources. The regional economic development that resulted from establishment of the Research Institute and tourism programs created employment opportunities and business development throughout the Beartooth Mountains region, demonstrating how archaeological discoveries could provide sustainable economic benefits for rural communities while preserving environmental and cultural resources. The economic impact of the site exceeded the Torres family's financial benefits and contributed to regional prosperity and development. The legal precedents that were established through management of the Torres Ranch site created frameworks for balancing private property rights with scientific research needs and public interest in archaeological discoveries. The legal arrangements that were developed provided models for managing similar discoveries while protecting both landowner interests and scientific values that benefit broader society. The conservation programs that were implemented at the Torres Ranch created models for sustainable land management that balanced archaeological preservation with environmental protection and sustainable economic development. The conservation techniques that were employed demonstrated how scientific research could contribute to environmental stewardship while providing economic benefits for landowners and local communities. 3 years after the discovery of Ramon's archaeological site, Michael Torres had become one of the most respected figures in the international archaeological community, serving as co-director of the Torres Archaeological Research Institute, while maintaining ownership of property that generated over $3.2 million annually through research partnerships, educational programs, and technology licensing agreements. The transformation of his life represented one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in contemporary American history. The academic recognition that Michael received included honorary degrees from major universities and awards from archaeological organizations whose recognition reflected appreciation for his cooperation in advancing scientific knowledge and his commitment to preserving Ramon's research legacy. The academic honors represented recognition of Michael's contribution to archaeology, despite his lack of formal training in the field. The family legacy that Michael preserved through his management of the archaeological site ensured that the Torres name would be permanently associated with one of the most important scientific discoveries in North American history. The preservation of family property and the scientific advancement that resulted from Ramon's work represented achievement that exceeded anything previous generations of the Torres family could have imagined. The story of how a dismissed amateur archaeologist's discoveries transformed an unemployed mechanic's desperate situation into international recognition, and scientific advancement became legendary throughout the archaeological community and inspired other amateur researchers, while demonstrating how extraordinary discoveries could emerge from unexpected circumstances and how individual dedication could contribute to advancing human knowledge. The judges and experts who had dismissed Ramon's archaeological theories as fantasy and natural rock formations publicly acknowledged their errors and issued formal apologies for failing to recognize genuine scientific discoveries that represented revolutionary advances in understanding prehistoric North American civilization. The professional vindication reflected recognition that academic expertise and institutional authority could sometimes overlook genuine innovation that emerged from unconventional sources. Today, the Torres Archaeological Research Institute continues to reveal new insights about prehistoric North American civilization while providing ongoing economic benefits for Michael and his family that have transformed their lives beyond anything they could have imagined during the desperate months when foreclosure seemed inevitable. The Institute represents one of the most successful examples of how archaeological discoveries can provide both scientific advancement and practical economic benefits for the families and communities that preserve important cultural resources. The legacy of Ramon Torres's archaeological research and Michael's determination to preserve his family's property demonstrates how extraordinary discoveries can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances and how individual courage and persistence can contribute to advancing human knowledge while providing solutions to personal crises that seem insurmountable. The Torres Ranch story proves that sometimes our most desperate moments force us to examine possibilities that reveal extraordinary opportunities hidden in plain sight. 5 years after Michael Torres first discovered the hidden entrance to his uncle's archaeological site, the Torres Archaeological Research Institute had become the most prestigious prehistoric research facility in the world, attracting scholars, government officials, and international dignitaries whose recognition of Ramon's discoveries had transformed not only Michael's life, but fundamentally altered humanity's understanding of prehistoric civilization and its relevance to contemporary global challenges. The ranch property that had once threatened Michael with foreclosure was now valued at over $200 million and generated annual revenue exceeding $15 million through research partnerships, technology licensing, educational programs, and sustainable tourism that had created economic prosperity throughout the entire Beartooth Mountains region. The revelation that had shaken the international archaeological community to its core came during the 3rd year of professional excavation, when Dr. Sarah Chen's team discovered that the prehistoric culture documented at the Torres site had developed technologies that were not merely advanced for their era, but were actually superior to many contemporary solutions for environmental management, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy production. The technological innovations that Ramon had been documenting for 30 years contained practical applications that could address climate change, food security, and environmental degradation challenges that modern civilization had been unable to solve despite decades of research and billions of dollars in development funding. The agricultural techniques that prehistoric inhabitants had perfected at the Torres site included soil management systems that could increase crop yields by 300% while actually improving soil quality and eliminating the need for chemical fertilizers or pesticides. The farming methods that had been preserved through careful archaeological documentation were so effective that major agricultural corporations were paying millions of dollars in licensing fees to implement ancient techniques that outperformed contemporary industrial agriculture while providing complete environmental sustainability. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the Department of Agriculture had led the team that analyzed prehistoric farming techniques discovered at the Torres site, concluding that the ancient methods represented the most significant advancement in sustainable agriculture since the development of crop rotation. Looked at the federal government's adoption of Torres site agricultural techniques for national food security programs had provided Michael's family with ongoing consulting fees exceeding $2 million annually, while contributing to American agricultural independence and environmental restoration. The water management systems that had been developed by prehistoric inhabitants included techniques for water purification, drought resistance, and flood control that were so sophisticated that engineering firms throughout the world were studying Torres site innovations for applications in contemporary water infrastructure projects. The water technologies that Ramon had documented were being implemented in regions throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where traditional engineering approaches had failed to provide reliable water supplies for growing populations. The renewable energy innovations that had been preserved at the Torres site included methods for harnessing geothermal, solar, and wind energy that exceeded the efficiency of contemporary renewable energy systems while using only materials and techniques that were available to prehistoric populations. The energy technologies that had been discovered were so advanced that major corporations were investing over $50 million in research programs designed to understand and adapt ancient innovations for contemporary energy production. The medical Knowledge that had been documented through carved stone records at the Torres site included pharmaceutical formulations, surgical techniques, and diagnostic methods that represented breakthroughs in contemporary medicine and had already led to successful treatments for conditions that modern medicine had been unable to address effectively. The medical innovations that prehistoric inhabitants had developed were providing solutions to antibiotic resistance, chronic diseases, and neurological conditions that affected millions of people worldwide. Dr. Michael Rodriguez from Johns Hopkins Medical School had spent 2 years analyzing medical knowledge preserved at the Torres site and had concluded that the prehistoric medical system documented here represents one of the most sophisticated healthcare approaches ever developed, with diagnostic accuracy and treatment effectiveness that exceeds many contemporary medical practices. The pharmaceutical companies that were licensing Torres site medical innovations were providing royalty payments that exceeded $8 million annually, while contributing to medical advances that were saving thousands of lives. The international recognition that Michael Torres received for his role in preserving and sharing Ramon's discoveries included invitations to address the United Nations General Assembly, the World Economic Forum, and major international conferences where his presentations about prehistoric innovations were influencing global policy development and international cooperation on environmental and technological challenges. Michael's transformation from unemployed mechanic to internationally respected expert on prehistoric technology represented one of the most remarkable personal transformations in contemporary history. The documentary that National Geographic produced about the Torres site discovery, titled "The Lost Civilization That Could Save the World," became the most watched archaeological documentary in television history and earned Michael additional income exceeding $12 million through international distribution rights, while inspiring global interest in archaeological research and prehistoric innovations. The documentary's impact extended beyond entertainment to influence educational curricula, government policies, and international research priorities that were addressing contemporary global challenges. The book that Michael co-authored with Dr. Sarah Chen, Lessons from the Deep Past, How Ancient Wisdom Can Solve Modern Problems, became an international bestseller that provided additional income while establishing Michael as a respected author and thought leader whose insights about prehistoric innovation were influencing academic research, corporate development, and government policy throughout the world. The book's success reflected growing recognition that archaeological discoveries could provide practical solutions to contemporary challenges rather than merely satisfying academic curiosity. The technology transfer programs that were established at the Torres site had created partnerships with over 200 corporations and government agencies whose implementation of prehistoric innovations was generating annual licensing revenue exceeding $25 million, while contributing to solutions for climate change, environmental degradation, and resource scarcity that affected billions of people worldwide. The commercial success of Torres site technologies demonstrated that archaeological research could provide immediate practical benefits rather than merely historical knowledge. The educational programs that had been developed at the Torres Archaeological Research Institute were serving over 10,000 students annually from universities throughout the world, whose field research and training programs were advancing archaeological methodology while providing hands-on experience with prehistoric technologies that were influencing contemporary innovation and development. The educational impact of the Torres site extended beyond archaeology to influence engineering, environmental science, agriculture, and medical research programs at major universities. The museum exhibitions that featured discoveries from the Torres site were attracting millions of visitors annually to institutions throughout the world, where displays of prehistoric artifacts and technologies were inspiring public interest in archaeology while generating substantial revenue through admission fees, merchandise sales, and educational programs. The Smithsonian Institution's permanent Torres site exhibition had become the most popular display in the museum's history and was influencing public understanding of prehistoric capabilities and their relevance to contemporary challenges. The research collaborations that had been established with international institutions included partnerships with universities and research centers in over 40 countries, whose joint investigation of Torres site discoveries was advancing global understanding of prehistoric civilization while providing ongoing income through shared research grants and collaborative projects. The international scope of Torres site research reflected recognition that Ramon's discoveries represented global heritage that warranted cooperative investigation and shared benefits. The conservation programs that had been implemented at the Torres site had created models for sustainable land management that were being adopted by conservation organizations throughout the world, whose environmental protection efforts were benefiting from prehistoric techniques for ecosystem management and biodiversity preservation. The conservation innovations that had been developed at the Torres site were providing solutions to environmental challenges that contemporary conservation science had been unable to address effectively. The legal precedents that were established through management of the Torres site had created frameworks for intellectual property rights related to traditional knowledge and archaeological discoveries that were influencing international law and providing protections for indigenous communities, whose cultural heritage was being preserved and respected through collaborative research arrangements. The legal innovations that emerged from Torres site management were contributing to social justice and cultural preservation efforts worldwide. The regional economic development that resulted from establishment of the Torres Archaeological Research Institute had transformed the Beartooth Mountains region from economically declining agricultural area to internationally recognized center for research and education that was supporting thousands of jobs and generating hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity. The local community that had once considered Ramon an eccentric outsider now recognized him as the founder of their region's prosperity and international recognition. The scientific journals that published research based on Torres site discoveries included articles in Nature, Science, and other leading publications whose peer-reviewed analysis of prehistoric innovations was influencing academic understanding of human development and technological evolution. The academic recognition that Torres site research received reflected the extraordinary scientific value of discoveries that were advancing multiple fields of study while providing practical applications for contemporary challenges. The government contracts that were established for implementing Torres site technologies in federal programs included partnerships with the Department of Defense, Environmental Protection Agency, and Department of Agriculture, whose adoption of prehistoric innovations was enhancing national security, environmental protection, and food security while providing substantial income for the Torres family and ongoing funding for archaeological research. The federal recognition of Torres site value demonstrated how archaeological discoveries could contribute to national interests and government effectiveness. The international awards that Michael Torres received for his contributions to archaeological research and technological innovation included recognition from UNESCO, the Nobel Committee, and major scientific organizations whose honors reflected global appreciation for his role in preserving and sharing discoveries that were benefiting humanity worldwide. The international recognition that Michael received represented acknowledgement that individual dedication and family heritage could contribute to advancing global knowledge and addressing universal challenges. The vindication that Michael experienced was not only personal, but extended to complete transformation of academic and public understanding of prehistoric capabilities and their relevance to contemporary life. The archaeological establishment that had dismissed Ramon's work was now acknowledging that their conventional understanding of prehistoric civilization had been fundamentally incorrect, and that amateur researchers could make discoveries that exceeded the achievements of institutional archaeology. Dr. Patricia Williams from the Montana Historical Society, who had originally dismissed Ramon's discoveries as natural rock formations, publicly acknowledged her error during a ceremony at the Torres site, where she stated, "Ramon Torres's archaeological work represents one of the most significant scientific achievements in Montana history, and my failure to recognize the value of his discoveries reflects the limitations of conventional academic thinking rather than any problems with his research methodology or scientific conclusions." Professor David Richardson from Montana State University, whose research had specifically argued against the possibility of significant archaeological discoveries in the Beartooth Mountains region, formally retracted his published conclusions and established a research fellowship in Ramon's honor at the university, where students could study the innovative methods that Ramon had developed for conducting archaeological research in challenging environments without institutional support. The Red Lodge Carbon County News published a special edition acknowledging their role in perpetuating negative stereotypes about Ramon's work and recognizing the economic benefits that his discoveries had brought to their community. The newspaper's editor wrote, "Ramon Torres was a visionary whose work has transformed our region and contributed to advancing human knowledge, and our previous coverage failed to recognize the extraordinary nature of his achievements and their potential for benefiting our community and the world." The transformation of public perception regarding amateur archaeological research reflected growing recognition that innovation and discovery could emerge from unexpected sources, and that institutional authority was not always reliable for evaluating unconventional approaches to scientific investigation. The Torres site discovery had demonstrated that individual dedication and alternative research methods could produce results that exceeded the achievements of well-funded institutional programs. The environmental impact that resulted from implementation of Torres site technologies included restoration of degraded agricultural land, improvement of water quality in contaminated regions, and reduction of carbon emissions through adoption of prehistoric renewable energy techniques. The environmental benefits that were achieved through application of ancient innovations exceeded the results of contemporary environmental programs and demonstrated the practical value of archaeological research for addressing global environmental challenges. The social impact of Torres site discoveries extended beyond scientific advancement to influence cultural understanding of prehistoric capabilities and human potential for innovation and cooperation. The recognition that prehistoric populations had developed sophisticated technologies and social organizations challenged contemporary assumptions about human development and provided inspiration for addressing contemporary social and technological challenges through innovative approaches that learned from historical experience. The economic impact of the Torres site extended far beyond Michael's personal financial transformation to influence regional development, international trade, and global investment in archaeological research and technology development. The commercial success of prehistoric innovations had demonstrated that archaeological discoveries could generate substantial economic benefits while contributing to solutions for contemporary challenges that affected billions of people worldwide. The Philosophical impact of Torres site discoveries included fundamental reconsideration of human development, technological progress, and the relationship between past and present that influenced academic research, government policy, and public understanding of human potential for innovation and adaptation. The recognition that prehistoric populations had achieved technological and social innovations that exceeded contemporary capabilities challenged conventional assumptions about progress and development. The legacy that Michael Torres created through his stewardship of Ramon's discoveries extended beyond personal success to contribute to advancing human knowledge, addressing global challenges, and demonstrating how individual dedication and family heritage could influence the course of human development and international cooperation. The Torres family's contribution to archaeological research and technological innovation represented one of the most significant civilian contributions to scientific advancement in contemporary history. The future research programs that were planned for the Torres site included expanded excavation, international collaboration, and technology development projects that would continue advancing scientific knowledge while providing ongoing economic benefits for Michael's family and the local community. The long-term planning for Torres site development ensured that Ramon's archaeological legacy would continue contributing to human advancement for generations to come. The inspiration that the Torres site story provided for other amateur researchers and individuals facing personal challenges demonstrated how extraordinary opportunities could emerge from desperate circumstances and how family heritage could contain hidden treasures that exceeded anything that conventional wisdom suggested was possible. The Torres family's experience proved that individual persistence and willingness to explore unconventional possibilities could lead to discoveries that transformed not only personal circumstances but contributed to advancing human knowledge and addressing global challenges. The recognition ceremonies that were held at the Torres site included participation by international dignitaries, scientific leaders, and government officials whose acknowledgement of Ramon's achievements and Michael's stewardship reflected global appreciation for discoveries that were contributing to human advancement and international cooperation. The ceremonies represented official recognition that the Torres site contained discoveries of global significance that warranted protection and support as international heritage sites. The scholarship programs that were established in Ramon's honor provided educational opportunities for students from rural and disadvantaged backgrounds whose interest in archaeological research and prehistoric technology was supported through funding that enabled them to pursue careers in scientific research and technological innovation. The educational legacy that was created through Torres site success ensured that Ramon's commitment to learning and discovery would inspire future generations of researchers and innovators. 7 years after Michael Torres first discovered the hidden entrance to Ramon's archaeological site, the transformation of his life and the global impact of his uncle's discoveries had exceeded anything that either man could have imagined during Ramon's lifetime of ridicule and isolation. The ranch property that had threatened Michael with foreclosure was now recognized as one of the most valuable archaeological sites in the world, generating annual income that supported not only Michael's family, but contributed to advancing human knowledge and addressing global challenges that affected billions of people. The story of how a dismissed amateur archaeologist's discoveries transformed an unemployed mechanic's desperate situation into international recognition and global impact became legendary throughout the scientific community and inspired countless individuals to investigate their own family histories while demonstrating how extraordinary discoveries could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances and how individual courage could contribute to advancing human civilization. The ultimate vindication that Ramon Torres received through posthumous recognition of his scientific achievements and the global implementation of his discoveries represented justice for a man whose dedication to advancing human knowledge had been sustained through decades of ridicule and isolation. The legacy that Ramon created through his archaeological work demonstrated how individual commitment to truth and discovery could overcome institutional bias and contribute to transforming human understanding of the past and its relevance to the future. Today, the Torres Archaeological Research Institute continues to reveal new insights about prehistoric civilization, while serving as a model for how archaeological discoveries can provide practical solutions to contemporary challenges. The Institute represents one of the most successful examples of how family heritage, individual persistence, and scientific dedication can combine to create discoveries that benefit not only individual families, but contribute to advancing human knowledge and addressing global challenges that affect all of humanity. The story of Michael Torres and Ramon's hidden archaeological legacy proves that extraordinary treasures can be concealed in the most ordinary places, and that sometimes the people who seem eccentric or dismissed by society are actually protecting secrets that could change our understanding of human potential forever. What hidden legacies might be waiting in your own family history? Like and subscribe for more incredible stories that prove ordinary people can make extraordinary discoveries that transform not only their own lives but contribute to advancing human civilization.